Kia ora koutou, no mai haere mai, and welcome to Frogs on Friday on what, well, you can't quite tell at the background here, but what is a beautiful day here in Tamaki Makaurau. On today's show, we're talking about the right to disconnect, work-life balance, all those good things, and seeing whether or not we're actually as good at it as we think we are. Also on the show today, we are talking about, is it time for New Zealanders to start working fewer hours? And, for a country renowned for its strong work-life balance, is New Zealand falling behind the rest of the world when it comes to the right to disconnect? And we have a special guest. We're joined by founder and host of Lenz podcast, Sanam Salmani, to delve into the growing conversation around Kiwi workers' right to disconnect and whether New Zealand's current approach is lagging behind other countries. We'll, of course, look through the hot jobs across New Zealand as well as opportunities in the UK and Australia, and finish off to see what's been happening in our social media polls. So let's jump into Mahi Media. Okay, so the results of the census are out and they've been highlighting some interesting work trends. It seems New Zealanders are working less hours on average. So that came out to an average of 37.2 hours per week versus 38.1 back in 2013. So not a huge decrease. And I guess it has a lot to do with the changes to the current job market with wage cost pressures. And the uptake of more flexible working, including part-time work and the gig economy. Now, despite our average hours decreasing slightly, we had over 10% of workers report working over 50 hours per week. And it's interesting because New Zealand has been looked upon as the poster child for work-life balance, but obviously that doesn't quite ring true for those 10%, and definitely not for the 300 people who reported working 24/7. So, of course, we'll be talking about the right to disconnect later in the show, and it definitely seems like there's a lot of kaimahi out there who feel like they're on call all the time. Let's take a look. Maybe they'll look for another role that's a little less demanding. Let's take a look at some of the hot jobs across New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. Okay, so first up for New Zealand, we have a policy manager role based in Wellington. So great to see some work coming through in the government sector in Wellington. It's been a pretty rough road, but we're starting to see things pick up. So this one, it's a decent contract, looking at around that 180 per hour mark, and looking after a team of 8 staff. Definitely need experience within central government policy, as well as that staff management experience. If you want to learn more about this and to see what else could be coming up, have a chat to Peter from our Wellington team. Okay, and permanent role, actually, I think this one's a fixed term contract. Yes, it is, 12-month fixed term. This is an HR and payroll coordinator position. It's based out in Wiri. A mix of different duties within this role. So things like drafting offer letters, preparing onboarding, as well as overseeing the timesheet and payroll processes. So you will need similar experience, and of course it helps if you live locally or it's easy to get to the location. To find out more about this role, get in touch with Kirsty from our team here in Auckland. Okay, and now we'll go through to a selection of jobs on offer in our offices across Australia and the UK. So for WA, we've got a business development manager, that's a permanent position. New South Wales, likely to be Sydney. Sales and admin support, that looks like that one's a perm role as well. And for the UK, a store manager. So as always, that's just a sample of the different roles coming through at our branches. And feel free to get in touch with any of the team at People to People, or just call us and we'll point you in the right direction. All right, thanks so much for joining us, Sanam.
Oh, thank you for having me. Can I also just say, Shannon, before we kick things off, those B-rolls are just chef's kiss. They're the best videos I've seen of anyone putting anything out there in terms of the office culture and life. And I can see everyone looks so happy, and they genuinely are whenever I come into the office. So it's so nice to see.
You can probably see me blushing, but it won't be half as much as Jacob will be blushed behind the scenes. So shout out to Jacob there, he does some great work there. Thank you for that. Now, of course, work-life balance, flexible working, how that all works, it's been a hot topic, well, forever, at least since COVID, but it seems like we're talking about that a lot. And of course, recently we've had the right to disconnect come through in Australia. So there's been some thoughts on, hang on a minute, we thought we're pretty good at the old work-life balance in New Zealand, but are we really, or are we lagging behind? And I think it's with the legislation in Australia, it's really led to a lot of Kiwi workers asking, well, why don't we have this? Do you think that this topic's become more of an issue recently in this modern workplace?
I do, and I believe that there's multiple factors at play, because a lot of times what we do is we generally look at it and go, look, we've got a new era of working, people want flexibility. But I think what we've actually got is a situation where we've got a new era of working, and yes, people are now demanding certain core principles like flexibility, even hybrid working, things like that. But then on the other hand, we've seen the workforce really change. And when we've seen people going through the pandemic, even just the socioeconomic issues that we're seeing, what we're noticing is that a lot of people are working hybrid, and it's bleeding into their personal lives, or they're dealing with jobs that are maybe meant to be done by 2 or 3 people. And so now they're stuck with that workload, and we're seeing these numbers of burnout and these increases. So in terms of, you know, is this topic something that's kind of come around and come up again? Yes, absolutely. And as you've pointed to as well, Shannon, it's not a conversation that ever goes away. We just kind of get reminded, and then we kick up a fuss, and then it kind of subsides and then goes away, and then it comes back again. But I think this time around, I truly believe it's here to stay. It was a very stark reminder that across the ditch, something is happening and we need to be looking at maybe changing our practices, not necessarily a new piece of legislation, but we'll get into that, I'm sure, but maybe our practices more so.
Oh, we all are always trying to keep up with the Aussies and keep an eye on what they're doing, aren't we? But I think even with the results from the census there are obviously people, you know, so nearly 300 people, you know, in this percentage-wise, that's not a lot. But for people to say, actually, I work every hour of every day. There's obviously that feeling, and if you think about people who might be in full-time employment but also have, say, caring responsibilities when they come home from work, or things like if they own their own business, so they are literally always on call or ready for something to pop up. It's very hard to keep that balance or to fend off that risk of burnout as well.
Yeah.
You know, I do like to kind of stand apart from the Aussies and not lean on them too much, but maybe
Yeah.
what lessons could we learn from them, and particularly being able to implement this into law to really make that change?
Look, I personally think we've actually got the legislation in place in terms of making sure that, health and safety is being met, and also the fact that you're not made to be available 24/7 unless you're compensated for that. It's the application and the implementation, and then also making sure that employers are picking this up and implementing it in the workplace is the main thing. And what I'm fearful of is that a piece of legislation like this could steer us in a bit of the wrong direction if we're moving away from traditional workplaces. So if we're not looking at 9 to 5s anymore and people are wanting flexibility, then what we can do is look at Australia's system, if we did want to adopt it, and look at the right to disconnect and see what bits and pieces we can take out, like you mentioned, Shannon. And I would say to that, it would probably be a lot better if we had just more streamlined legislation. At the moment, Australia's legislation says unreasonable, refusal and contact. And in terms of a definition, what does that mean? It's really broad. And all we're kind of waiting for is just, biting our nails and trying to figure out when's the next case going to come out so we can actually figure out what the parameters are.
Yeah, it does seem to have like there's some real positives in where it's come from, but the way it's set up does seem to make it quite antagonistic, and put kind of pitting people against each other, which obviously isn't the intention there. I think the other thing you mentioned, look, we've already got a lot of things in place. It's just how you would adapt those, or make it or bring it into your processes at work. But I also think in mindset as well. So there's a lot we've been talking about, return to office, and whether productivity, whether you're more productive at home or in the office watching over someone, and the distractions here. We've talked about it a lot. But I think a lot of New Zealanders are still kind of hooked up on that idea that productivity is about how many hours you're working, or I got in the earliest and I got in early and I stayed late, or and that's what makes the difference, whether rather than being more focused on those outcomes and kind of embracing that flexibility and going, well, does it really matter if I'm doing the work at 3 a.m. If I'm able to get those outcomes and it works for me, and I can also have those benefits of being able to cover things at home.
Yeah, and I think it's twofold, isn't it? It comes from the managers, the employers, the leaders, and then it also comes from the employee having to know that there is no expectation on you, and you will not be rewarded for hanging around a bit extra. If you've already gotten your work done, we don't need to see that that you've stayed back for an extra 3 hours or anything like that. When I'm going through my law career, I did have one situation in private practice where I got told the perception of me being at my desk and working was a lot more important than kind of getting the work done. So I do think we live in this kind of ideology or understanding of this is the way that work needs to operate, but we can absolutely move away from it. And it's amazing once you do, you realize, wow, there's no more 9 to 5. I can actually finish things after dinner if I quickly want to jump on and do it. But it's that balance of not letting it kind of bleed into your personal life as well, which is the fine line.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're getting there, but perhaps there's a wee way to go yet. Your example there reminded me another client, and their manager might send an email to a team outside of hours, and this person, a friend, was kind of went into this panic. We're out at the pub, it's a Friday night or something. I was done. She was not. So it was literally, she's like, oh, I've got to quickly race, so I'm the first to respond to this, because it was all about this kind of system of brownie points, and that's what was important instead of actual outcomes. So yeah, New Zealand doesn't do so well in our productivity, so maybe we need to rethink what's important and how to go about things. Here's the crystal ball moment. So what do you see looking into the future? So things like the right to disconnect, how do you think these kind of initiatives or changes might reshape the future of work for New Zealand heading into the future?
I really think at least it started the conversation. I think we generally know from the announcements that have been made by Minister 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and just generally from the coalition government that this isn't on their agenda, and they're not going to pick up a right to disconnect bill and send it on through and see what happens. So I definitely think that this isn't on the cards in terms of a government perspective. But why not make this a topic of conversation in the workplace? Why not bring to light the fact that certain people, like you've identified, Shannon, in the business, their messages carry a lot more weight. So why not actually work with that and work in a way where we can make it a lot more transparent in businesses that, look, we actually do operate 24/7 effectively, and this is what it means when you're signing up and joining and coming on board, and making sure that we obviously compensate people for their time. But I believe that the problem is that we're not having these frank conversations, and a lot of times the flexibility is what's wanted, but then we regiment things into a 9-to-5 day. So it's really good for employers to just sit down and have a chat and actually figure it out, have that conversation.
Yep. Well, I think those are wise words of advice. And also, you didn't pin yourself to something too specific, so we can't disprove your crystal ball.
No,
There,
there you
very
go.
smart.
Oh yeah, by
Sneaky.
December we'll have a new piece of legislation.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for that. Your details are up on screen, so if you do want to get in touch and find out more, I've really enjoyed the conversation. Feel free to get in touch there and listen to the podcast. Let's have a look now at our polls. Okay, so we were thinking once the New Zealand job market bounces back, and it'll get there, what's your plan? So very interesting to see that there's obviously a few, sticking by, happy to have a role and to stay where they are now, but once the tide turns, they'll be looking for other options. So 59%, very interesting to see those results there. Also, as always, we'd love to hear your comments if you're brave enough to let us know about that, or just get in touch with us when you are ready to make that move. This week, so what aspect of remote or hybrid work appeals to you most? So we probably need an all of the above, but again, put in your comments and tell us what you really like best about the opportunity for flexible working. That is it for today's show. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll be here the same time next week, 12:30 on Friday. See you then.